I would like to share my screen and talk about briefly about the presentation that I have prepared. So, let's see. Can you guys all see that? The print, since no one is actually turning on camera, I just wanted to make sure whether I'm doing right. Okay, screen 2. Okay. So let me know if you have a trouble with seeing this screen, this PowerPoint slide. So what I wanted to talk about for today's conversation is, understanding more thoroughly about why people are falling for misinformation and how journalists can help stop spreading about that misinformation, right? So that we can develop some more strategies to help people get accurate information and counter misinformation. So as you guys have seen a lot and heard a lot, watch a lot, there is so much misinformation going around on this, especially the COVID-19 pandemic. And here are some of the examples that you guys are kind of familiar with. Like the picture right here at the top here is about the COVID-19 is a hoax because like it is connected with 5G. 5G is the one actually spreads COVID-19. And since this misinformation has spread out, like there has been so much confusion going around, especially in the, England, like UK, because some of the people who actually believe this misinformation, they went to the 5G tower and tried to burn it. So like you guys can imagine, like this kind of misinformation generates a huge cost, right? Not only to just the people who believe it, but also to a whole society because it affects like public health decision making. The other pictures on the right side are talking about like the health and medical misinformation, I can say, more likely about the treatment of COVID-19, right? Like can lemon tea prevent COVID-19? And, not only this, but, I can say like other medical misinformation about cancer, right? There's so much misinformation about like cancer treatment and what other else? Like flu vaccine, or even more like COVID-19 vaccine these days. So, I mean, I'm just talking about right now about the health misinformation and medical misinformation, but as you guys can imagine, like 2020 presidential election, so much misinformation and fake news have also going around for both of the two candidates, like Biden and Trump. So that can ultimately danger our public health decision making and furthermore democracy. And it can further increase like polarization between the parties who disagree with each other. So overall, I wanted to highlight first that misinformation is a serious problem in society. So I hope that, as a soon to be journalists or soon to be like media professionals, I guess, you have to take this matter in a very seriously and start to think deeply about how you guys can deal with this misinformation. So in order to understand more deeply about the features of misinformation and some of the ways that we can counter misinformation, I just wanted to first mention about the characteristics of misinformation and corrective information. So here I just wrote down about the two features first. The one is speed, and then the other one is network, right? So when it comes to the speed, it says like misinformation spreads much more faster than truth. And a lot of research has actually found that this is true, right? So start thinking about like why this happens, right? Why the misinformation spreads faster than truth. And we can share, our thoughts later on, but this is something that really you guys should have to focus on, right? The second feature is about the network. In other words, misinformation spreads via your networks and your followers. If you think about the social media environment, you probably have a lot of like followers and you probably have a lot of followees as well. And most of the networks could be your friends, families, like somebody you already know of in your offline environment. However, there might be also possibility that other strangers, right, the person who you don't know may spread misinformation, and you might eventually be exposed to that misinformation. However, given, although that possibility can occur, a lot of research is actually talking about the misinformation that you are receiving from your close networks are really powerful, and it is really dangerous, because you will, if you suppose that you receive information from your friends or your parents, then it is very likely that you believe it, because you already have a credibility toward that close networks. So another important thing in regard to source of misinformation is that it's humans, not bots, who are primarily responsible for spreading this misinformation. There has been so much conversation going around about the danger of Russian bots, or other social bots, because they are the one who, machines are the ones who just keep spreading misinformation on social media. However, research has found a very interesting finding that, instead of bots, humans are the primary sources who spread misinformation, right? Which really gives a kind of, something to think about, as a journalist and as a media professionals, how we can persuade people not to spread misinformation, how we can alert people, right, not to share misinformation, right? So these kind of like understanding the basic features of the spread of misinformation would definitely give us to think about and expand our thoughts how we can counter this situation. So moving on to like the first point, and I do want to note that I have 3 main points of this whole presentation slides. So the first point is, what drives us to believe misinformation, right? And there are actually so many different factors that drives people to believe misinformation. There are some kind of like, situational factors, right? Uncertain situation. Like this pandemic shows, if people are being in a certain situation, then they try to find misinformation because they want to make a sense of the situation, right? And that is very basic knowledge about the rumor theory. The second, possible factors are kind of personal relevance. So you guys probably have a more credibility toward the information if that information is relevant to your life, right? If you have no other families like outside the United States, you guys would probably like not gonna believe it, or probably just ignore information that is going around outside of the country. So in that sense, personal relevance may be an issue. And moving on to more kind of like the media technologist perspective, these days, social media algorithm have been, emerged as a real problem, because if you use social media, you may see some kind of messages pop up on your account, and sometimes, well, like oftentimes, a lot of times, those kind of all the messages and advertisements are kind of based on what you searched on Google and what you had an interest in it. So I can say that social media already knows what you're interested in, which is scary on the other hand. But this algorithm is something that really drives you to believe information. The last one is, about, again, like what your networks are saying. So again, this is related to the close networks. So these are just the basic factors that a lot of research, a lot of scholars have talking about. But I wanted to more focus on the major factors that we can think, we as a journalist and media professional can think. So the first one I have wrote down here is like unconscious bias or political orientation, right? What that means is that people tend to just accept and believe information that matches their existing point of views, right? So this kind of like the bias actually happens unconsciously. So you probably have believed misinformation, even though, you're not realizing that that is a false or true, right? You just believe it because that actually matches your political points of view, which is very problematic. The other demographic, factors can be like education level or people who have a low media literacy. So if you imagine like other populations, like especially old population who don't know how to use like digital media technologies, then if they see something on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, I mean, they really don't have no idea, like they would have no idea how to control over that information. So low media literacy in that sense would probably matter. And the last one is about the emotions. So again, like this is kind of unconscious process. If we are in a situation that we feel anger or we feel fear, anxiety, like all those emotions also lead us to believe the certain misinformation. So all these kind of different factors are kind of going around all together, go hand in hand. So that ultimately affects us to believe this false information. So suppose that you guys now, quite had a good understanding of why we believe misinformation. Then the second question that we have to think is how we can counter misinformation, right? For some of you who use Facebook, I know that Facebook is kind of perceived as a platform which old populations are using, but if you see the Facebook, then if you search something on COVID-19, you probably have been exposed to this kind of message, which just popped up on your account, which says help friends and family avoid false information about COVID-19, right? And share a link to the World Health Organization's website. This is kind of the strategy that Facebook started to apply for this pandemic situation. Because like I said before, a lot of like health misinformation is going around about the pandemic, but it's kind of like, impossible for Facebook to control over all of the information because it can also violate some kind of freedom of speech issue. So what they are actually suggesting is to give an alert message before people are being exposed to other Facebook posts. And WHO, from a health organization perspective, also released this kind of so-called like visual-based, information, right, to help audiences understanding better. So all of these strategies are actually being called as inoculation strategy because we are giving these corrective information, helpful information before being exposed to misinformation, right? So, you probably have heard about the inoculation term when it comes to vaccine, right? We are saying that inoculating people, right, by having vaccine to them. So borrowing that term, what we say as inoculation strategy is giving this information, this corrective information, before having people to be exposed to misinformation. The second kind of way that a lot of journalists and a lot of social media companies are doing is this detection strategy, which is, in other words, about the post-exposure to misinformation, right? So suppose that you went to the, like fake website or some kind of superficial website or other fake information, then if you install these functionalities on your Chrome browser extension, or if you also install some of the apps or alert messages, then you will probably be exposed to these kind of warning messages whenever you actually go to these fictitious website, right? So like you guys can see here on the right, this is a screenshot of the NewsGuard. And what the NewsGuard is applying is that they actually release this kind of messages whenever you go to the superficial website. So it says proceed with caution. This website severely violates basic journalistic standards, and they also scored, right? Gave a score to the website, and it says a 5 out of 100, which is really low. So that means this website is fake. So that you guys should pay much attention in processing the information out there. And they also provide some of the criteria like credibility or transparency here, right? So, they are just giving the scores based on these criteria. And the last one about how we can counter misinformation is having a self-censorship or health skepticism. What that actually means is that is indeed depending on our own efforts, right? Individuals' own efforts. But even though we have a lot of these cool techniques like detection techniques or inoculation strategies, if the individuals don't want to accept that information, then they will probably fall for misinformation, right? So ultimately, what's very important in this situation is that having a healthy skepticism, right? So that means individuals should not believe everything what they read, hear, or see. So this would probably the last slides that I prepared, and we're gonna move on to the Q&A session. The last part is, so what can the journalist can do to counter misinformation, right? I mean, like the fact checking can be done by human efforts. I mean, it actually has been done by humans. However, given the development of artificial intelligence these days, this AI thing started to recognize the fake news, fake information in an automatic manner. So, I mean, the technology can provide some of the solutions, but again, journalists should also collaborate with these AI and then correct the misinformation in a very timely and efficient manner. Because once people are being exposed to misinformation, and if we miss the golden time, then they were gonna just believe it. It is very likely that people were gonna believe it because misinformation is very appealing, it's very attractive, right? And furthermore, the most fundamental problem these days that I'm seeing is that public's trust to journalists are very, very low. So we have to think about how we can build a mutual relationship with the public, in other words, ordinary citizens and journalists, so that publics can have a high credibility toward the media outlets and toward the journalists, right? So they were gonna believe information like news articles that journalists are releasing. So to more think about how the journalists can report, especially this pandemic or something like uncertain situations that everything is up in the air, then I would suggest like primarily the two main points. The first one is journalists should report a story from a collectivist perspective, because you will probably also see that a lot of people are just fighting with each other by saying that their own arguments are right. So they, in that process, they also stigmatizing others, right? But that is definitely not a good way because, trying to understand other opinions, even that other opinions are not aligning with your viewpoint, that is something that is really important in these days because nobody wants to be stigmatized, right? So once we show the attitudes that this is for our whole society and combating this misinformation for our holistic, efforts, then probably we can reach some consensus later on. The second point here is identifying ways to enhance engagement audiences and correcting information. What that exactly means is that even though journalists show a lot of corrective information and news articles, if the public don't engage in it, then it is very likely to not having them believe it, right? Believe the corrective information. So not only to just releasing the corrective information, perhaps the most important thing that journalists should have to consider is how to make people engage in that corrective information, right? So that means how we can make our messages to have people share and click likes about the messages, right? So these are the two main factors in these days that I'm seeing that journalists should consider in releasing that news articles. Okay, I guess that's pretty much about it. I guess the time now is 2:20, and I hope to use the remaining time, which is around 10 minutes, to answer questions and talk about further if you have something to bring up. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to unmute your microphone and show your face. I mean, it doesn't matter. But Rocha, I think that you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Okay, nice to meet you.
You too. Okay, so I'm working for the yearbook. And so I was in charge of like the politics page. And so I was like using sites like BBC and like things that I thought was reliable. But how do like I know that what I was reading wasn't like wrong?
So what you're saying is that you believe that the website is reliable, right? The source is reliable, but you actually had a difficulties in understanding which criteria that you have to rely on to believe that sources, right? That's a good question. So I guess like there are so many criteria I can say, but one of the important strategy that I always tell my student is to double check the sources and double check the story. For example, if you see some stories about Biden on the news website that you're using, right? Then probably it'll be good for you to copy and paste that headlines and search on Google and see other news sources are also talking about. If that is the one, if the source that you are relying on are the only one who talk about the news article, then the news article probably would not be the credible one. Because if that topic emerges as a very important one to a society, a lot of news articles will also address it. So it's really important to double check it. And not only the double checking behavior, I also wanted to say that whenever you read the messages, the news articles, try to interpret from your own perspective. Like, I'm not saying that you need to interpret the news articles from a biased way based on your subjective thinking, but I wanted to say that if you think about what's behind meaning of these news articles, right? Like, why did journalists write this way? And what does these interviews are trying to say, right? By having an interview here. Then interpretation in that sense would really increase your media literacy level so that you can also have a very critical eyes in interpreting that news articles. Does that help?
Yes.
That was a very good question. Thank you. All right, so again, like if you guys have any other questions, please feel free to just unmute your microphone and ask a question that you may have. Any others? If you guys, even if you guys don't have any questions, you are feel to just, share your experiences that you have exposed to any of the fake news or misinformation in general, and just share your thoughts, like how my lecture is kind of related to your own experience as well. That might be also helpful.
Oh, hi, I'm Terry.
Hi, Terry.
So when you find like new information, like for your video, how would you suggest like putting it into the video, like without making it sound not educational, or if I don't know if that makes sense, but
can you give me some more specific examples?
Like not basically how you should word it.
How I should create a video to include my opinions over there in an accurate manner. Is that what you're trying to say?
I don't know. I
mean, that question seems to be very interesting. So you came up with the idea of the video. So why do you think, I can ask a question back to you. Do you think that the video creates more problem to confuse people's understanding than just text-based information? Do you think the video creates a more huge problem in this for the fake news or misinformation?
Do I think the video?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, do you think that the video is more persuasive in making people believe the fake information than other types of information like text or image?
Yes, I do.
And why do you think so?
Because it's more visual, and like people may like tend to believe like what you're saying about like your mannerisms and like how you word things,
Mhm.
it can actually not turn out to be true. So
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
definitely think the video has more
That's a-
impact.
that's a very good point, and I hope that that is what you wanted to ask a question to me. But I wanted to add a little bit about the video because I'm not sure whether Terry and other of you guys here have heard about the word deepfake. Because like deepfake is a face swapping video. So the deepfake creators may just borrow your face, and then swap with other person's faces, and then make people believe that Terry said something, which is definitely not true. You didn't say anything, right? But they're creating video in that way. So that is called as deepfake. So it's kind of like more developed and complicated version of misinformation. And like, yeah, like you said, deepfake is really a problem because A, it's not only visual, right? Which makes people more persuasive, but B, it's like there's no way that we can discern whether this video is true or not, right? It's kind of like using the artificial intelligence in a very negative way. So that is some like the another story that we can talk for an hour. But yeah, that is something that I really think that not only Terry but other you guys in this room should think about, because I guess that these deepfake and other complicated misinformation would make a huge problem as time goes by. So once you are, actually go to the industry later on, this is something that you guys should deal with on. So this is very important issue. Thanks for bringing that up, Terry.
Oh, thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, 2 minutes left, so probably we have a minute for just answering one last question. Right, so if you guys don't have any questions, I guess that's pretty much about it. I hope that our conversation and my lecture was kind of helpful to you. And if you have any questions, just please feel free to email me. You know my name, so if you type my name on Google, then you would probably easily to find my email address. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have later on. So thank you so much for being here, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the other sessions.
You too.
Bye-bye.